lobby. Let's all go to the lobby, lobby. Let's all go to the lobby to get ourselves a treat.
Hello, horror hounds, and welcome to Now Slang, an It's Lay's podcast production where we break down the latest and greatest in the world of horror. I'm your not-so-humble host, Colton.
I'm Rowan.
And today on the show, we're going to be reviewing BEAU is Afraid, which was released April 21st, 2023, exclusively in theaters. But before we get into the review discussion, Rowan, everyone knows we're fans of Ari Aster, so instead, I want to know, what are your thoughts on Mr. Joaquin Phoenix? Are you a fan of his, a hater? And then based on those thoughts, were you looking forward to this 3-hour-long movie, BEAU is Afraid?
I mean, yeah, like you said, we're big fans of Ari Aster, so as much Ari Aster as I can get, I'm all for the runtime. I'm not scared of a long movie.
Says the guy who's constantly telling us that every single movie needs to be cut down and basically be like 70 minutes long. But, all right.
Something epic, it can be longer, I guess. I don't need to see, like, In the Woods slasher for 3 hours, but...
Fair enough.
I mean, for Joaquin, I'd say I'm like relatively a fan of his. I was a big Her person. That's kind of my wheel of films that I enjoy, and he was great in Gladiator and Joker, and the best M. Night Shyamalan movie, Signs, maybe.
I thought you were gonna say The Village.
Oh, The Village, yeah. No, I wasn't gonna say The Village, but I mean, yeah. I also feel like, what was the weird one he did? The I'm Still Here or whatever.
You Were Never Really Here.
Yeah, that's what it was. I did see that once. I felt like I liked it when I saw it.
Oh, wait. I'm Still Here. There is one where he's like playing a movie star.
Yeah, it's like...
Is that the one you're talking about?
Yeah, it's like a fictitious version of himself, essentially.
Okay, because there's the other one that's called literally You Were Never Really Here. That's a Lynn Ramsey movie, which is like a revenge thriller where he like kills people with a hammer.
Oh, no, this definitely wasn't it.
Okay.
I only saw that once, though, and I feel like I liked it. But yeah, I'm a pretty big fan. I think he's usually good in anything he does. I respect his craft. What about you? Are you a Joaquin Phoenix guy?
Yeah, I mean, I think the guy is a pretty great actor. I think, as you said, he won an Oscar for Joker. He was excellent in Her, Gladiator, The Master. I really like him in The Master. He's really good. And come on, man, he's in Brother Bear, which is a very underrated animated kids movie. But yeah, based off of that, obviously, I wasn't looking forward to this movie at all. I can't even say that with a straight face. I mean, I'm a huge A24 fanboy. Everybody knows it. I'm literally wearing a bootleg A24 shirt as we record this. So yeah, of course I was looking forward to this. Even if I wasn't the biggest fan of Midsommar, which I feel like I take every single opportunity to mention on any podcast I'm on, I'm always excited for a new Ari Aster flick. I think he's an interesting film director. I like a lot of his stylistic sensibilities, specifically in the world of horror. Even, like I said, with Midsommar not being the biggest fan, a lot of it was very well crafted and well done and at least interesting. So for this one, I avoided trailers like the plague. I think I've seen maybe 2 or 3 screenshots of it, heard the trailer, but, would try my best to zone out on my phone, like when it was on, because, it did have a pretty good marketing push within the last couple of months. So yeah, basically I was ready to go. I saw all the buzz coming out. I saw everyone saying this was the worst movie ever made and that sort of thing. And, yeah, so I was like, all right, let's see this. Is this the worst movie ever made? Was basically how I went into this movie. And, before we answer that question, I say we should just roll the trailer.
I'm visiting my mother tomorrow.
How you feeling about that?
Feeling sad about going home, Bo? Must feel totally unreal.
You will walk many miles. Your adventures will continue for years.
We are waiting, Bo.
I'm on my way.
What you just heard is from BEAU is Afraid, written and directed by Ari Aster, and the story is as follows. Following a sudden tragedy, BEAU, a mild-mannered but anxiety-ridden man, confronts his darkest fears as he embarks on an epic, Kafkaesque odyssey to return home to his mother. Now, here on Now Slang, we like to keep things relatively spoiler-free up front before getting into the more in-depth, spoiler-filled discussion. So, Rowan, You're fresh out of the theater. I know you never wrote down any thoughts. You told me ahead of time. But what are your spoiler-free thoughts on BEAU is Afraid?
Well, I wanted to start off by asking you a question, and it was when you finished the movie, did you stand up and start screaming and demanding that A24 be taken the task for this?
I did not, but I will admit that my audience was not very happy with this movie.
No.
I saw this on Thursday night, and we're recording this on late Saturday evening, so it's been a couple of days since I've seen it, and it was actually a sold-out screening, the very first showing here in St. John's of BEAU is Afraid, and it was packed full of, obviously, other A24 fanboys, probably fans of Midsommar and Hereditary, you know, and I heard people audibly saying throughout the movie that this is awful, this is a waste of time, this might be the worst movie they've ever seen. And literally when it ended, people were basically very audible saying like, what was the point of this? Or that was absolute shit. There was 3 or 4 people that were very expressing, you know, loudly to the theater that it was absolute trash. So I didn't scream, I didn't yell at it, but what I'll say is it definitely evoked, you know, feelings from the audience.
Which it should, I guess. I mean, that's probably Ari Aster's whole goal of this.
Yeah, there's some filmmaker or some artist that said somewhere that if you're not inspiring some sort of reaction from your audience, that you're doing it wrong. Whether it be this is absolute trash or this is the best thing ever made, at least it's, you know, it's inspiring conversation. And that's kind of like what this movie is, where it's like at least it's not going to be completely boring and forgotten about. Even if you hate it, you're going to talk about it. And even if you love it, you're going to, you know, fanboy over it.
Yeah, see, so my audience, it actually wasn't very busy. There might have been under 10 of us there.
Wow, okay.
But it was all pretty young. Like, I'd say you're looking at, like, you know, I might have been the oldest person there, like, in my 30s. Mm-hmm. It looked like a lot of university kids and everything. And I thought it was kind of interesting because, you know, we kind of said when we polled whether or not we should review this, like, this isn't a horror movie, like... And I know there's probably some arguments to that. You know, I know Ari Aster's been pretty adamant on the marketing of this, that, you know, it's a black comedy and...
Yeah, his specific terminology is a nightmare comedy, which makes no sense outside of the realm of this movie. But if you watch this movie, it's pretty much pitch perfect. Like, that's literally what it is, pretty much. And I will say, even though it's not a horror movie, there's definitely... horror, blood and influence in this. There's many scenes that evoke terror or anxiety, or like there is straight up horror scenes in this movie, you know?
Yeah, and I mean, I was gonna say, like, you know, when I was in the middle of watching it, and, you know, when we got done watching it, to me, this is very adjacent to horror in the same fact as, I mean, you know, most people label... you know, Mother as a horror movie, which, you know, this, for many reasons, kind of invoked my thoughts when I first watched Mother for the first time. Yeah. Because, you know, this film, it's, you know, about anxiety and guilt, and I think it does a good job of, you know, putting that on screen, but not necessarily, it's hard to explain. I was going to say not necessarily beating you over the head, but it is beating you over the head.
It's definitely beating you over the head with it, yeah. It's just kind of, it keeps ratcheting up the different ways that it's showcasing anxiety, I guess. Like, no joke, probably within the first 15 minutes of this movie, you probably get a dozen different examples of anxiety-inducing moments in the movie. You know, whether it be not being able to swallow your pills with water, whether it be leaving the house and trying to remember if you left the door open, or, hey, a brown recluse, you know, venomous spider crawling around your apartment complex. There's numerous ways at which this movie induces anxiety in the audience and the character of BEAU throughout it. And it's kind of one of the better aspects of the movie is about how it constantly keeps ratcheting up or finding new ways to try and bring you into the headspace of BEAU and create that feeling of anxiety.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I thought I did a really good job of that. I know, like, my audience was pretty audible throughout it. So, but like
in a good way, like, in a good way, laughing at it
seemed like everyone was really into it. They were laughing at stuff, and this is the kind of movie too. Like, you you're kind of laughing at the uncomfortable also, just because you're like, oh my God, what is going on here?
This is one of those movies that it actually wants you to laugh at it. Like, it wants you to kind of revel in the absurdity of what's happening. And it's not obviously a comedy in terms of like it's always quipping and cracking jokes, even though there is, one-liners or little sequences that are like straight out of like comedy setup payoff. But it just wants you to kind of basically be like, this is insane. Like, what the hell am I watching?
Yeah.
And there's numerous times that it worked for me as well. I laughed a lot at this movie. Not always intentionally so, but I laughed a lot.
No, and I think to me that was very present in kind of the first act of this movie to me.
Yeah.
There's a lot of like graffiti and posters in the background that all kind of had, funny things written on them that were just kind of absurd. And
a sex store that's literally basically in his apartment complex. It's called like Erectus Ejectus, that sort of thing.
Yeah, like just a lot of out there kind of stuff. And I think really the whole time watching it, my main thoughts were, how do I feel like, how is this going to kind of be accepted by a general audience and things like that. And I think if you're willing to sit for the 3-hour ride, like I think it does pretty good on the premise it's offering you. It's definitely built like an epic, like a hero story of this build up, which I say hero story, it's probably an inverse of a hero story, because I don't know if anything ever really good comes his way.
No, and he's not a very he's not a protagonist that has a lot of action, right? It's more so all these things keep befalling him, or like stumbling his progress, or like he is forced to move because of something horrific happening. It's not like he's making the choice. He's not a very active protagonist, is basically what I'm saying, right? He's kind of bumbles through it, essentially.
Yeah, 100%. And I do want to mention, before I forget it off the top of my head, is I thought Joaquin looked awesome in this. Like, just the hair, like everything. Like, I thought they made him look so good, of just this like, kind of, just fucked up middle-aged white guy living in the city. He's like losing his hair. He's a little overweight.
Yeah.
And I was like, he looks fantastic. Because, I mean, if you've seen Joaquin and Joker or anything, like, he's a pretty fit guy. Joaquin is like a fairly attractive guy. And they really just give him that kind of, just kind of, like you said, just this bumbling, lonely guy living
he definitely has like an everyman look in this. Like, you've seen people in real life that look like BEAU, and you've seen them probably almost every time you go to the mall, that sort of thing. It's a very much like kind of a plainer looking character. What do you think about his performance as BEAU? Or maybe also this is a better way to just launch into the general performances of everyone around, because I'm just curious, because you liked his aesthetic. I thought it was fine. It didn't like stand out to me. But what do you think of him?
I thought he did pretty good. I mean, BEAU is kind of, to me, it's probably a rather hard character to do, because BEAU is pretty subdued. It's not a lot, like you said, it's not a lot of action. It's just kind of a lot of like, gasping and just kind of not knowing, looking anxious and confused and not, mumbling everything. And so I thought Joaquin was probably the perfect choice for this. To me, I thought there was like some other better performances than him in this. That to me, like I really like Kylie Rogers in it, who played Tony. Like, I thought she was fantastic in this. And, Nathan Lane, I thought was really good in this also.
Yeah, his character has a really fun quirk to him that was, it was constantly kind of getting chuckles from my audience, like a certain quirk or a way of speaking with his character.
Like I said, I think everyone was pretty competent in this. And, of course, we get, kind of like a sex icon of, like, the late 80s, early 90s, and, like, Parker Posey's in this. And I mean, we'll talk about it later in the spoilers, but, like, I thought she was fantastic in this, and probably really the highlight of the movie. But yeah, I mean, I thought the acting was all pretty well. What were your thoughts on old Joaquin?
Yeah, honestly, I wasn't a huge fan of him in this movie, and I think it's literally kind of what you're saying, that the character is just It's kind of whatever, he's constantly reacting to everything around him, and just kind of the surreal aspect of this movie is very much like almost anything can happen, and the movie very much establishes that, like from the first 15 to 20 minutes. So it's kind of similar to when we were discussing like Evil Dead Rise a couple of days ago. It's like when you show so much gore in the beginning of a movie, you become desensitized to it a little bit. And it was like this movie is so weird up front and so like authentically showing you what it is. I was kind of just like always kind of shrugging along with it. It was like, yeah, anything can happen. So this is wild, but that's kind of what we signed up for. And then kind of Beau's character almost felt that way where, it was like his greatest nightmares or like the worst possible thing that could happen was constantly happening to him. So he was always kind of reacting the way you should, kind of be surprised or, kind of scared or, kind of running away or whatever. But it was just kind of a performance that didn't really leave me. I didn't think it was a great performance or anything. It was perfectly serviceable. What I will say is outside of Beau, and this is because a lot of the movie is told from his point of view, I thought a lot of the characters felt a little bit wooden or spoke in a little bit of like a stilted, awkward way. And once again, I think that's literally the fact that a lot of this movie could be probably argued that it takes place in Beau's head or inside of like an anxiety-ridden nightmare or something like that, where it's like, this might not actually be real people or the way people are speaking or whatnot, right? This could be like a projection or something like that. So a lot of the dialogue and the performances felt just a little bit off to me. And I think they were supposed to feel off-putting because of what type of movie this is. But it was just like, I wasn't always vibing with it. There were certain characters, as you said, or certain moments that I did like them. But all in all, I was a little bit, I don't know, I didn't think it was like great acting or anything. I wouldn't say that's the strength of the movie.
No, not at all. And I think with Beau, like, I mean, I feel like you really could have got it didn't have to be Joaquin. Like, this isn't like Joaquin or bust type of thing. I feel anyone could have walked into that role and probably done it serviceably.
Yeah, it's kind of like when Joaquin comes to a movie, like he's a weird guy, obviously. We all know this, and this is a weird character, to be fair. But it's just, once again, I know his like acting prowess, and I could probably name half a dozen movies, in my opinion, that he is better in. And once again, it's not saying he's bad in this. It's just it didn't like blow me away or anything. He's not going to be nominated for Beau is Afraid as a great performance, next year at the Oscars type of thing, right? Like he does what he has to do, essentially.
Yeah, and I do agree with the rest of the acting, even though, like I said, I did like Nathan Lane and Kylie Rogers and stuff. Like, I did enjoy them, and I don't know if maybe it was because of the length, and this is split up in kind of like a traditional like acts almost, like a play.
There's very three distinct acts in this movie, and you can argue four because there's an extended sequence that's kind of outside of the movie, but it's very much a traditional 3-act structure, it feels like.
I felt like, and maybe it is the kind of actors that Ari Aster casted, but I just felt that it really had this like play quality to it, which like, Nathan Lane is like very famous for like Broadway and stuff like that. Like there's a lot of Broadway people in this that kind of made their chops on plays of Broadway. And so I just felt like it always kind of had this weird stage feel to it, not necessarily a movie feel.
And that kind of, I said a lot of the performances were very like muted or very wooden, but there is also the opposite side of that where a lot of the performances are very heightened and kind of over the top and like so manic that it's like, once again, people don't really behave like this. But in the mind of someone who is unwell or very anxious, like that's kind of what it always feels like to you. It feels like everyone's a little bit too intense. And I very much got that feeling from this movie. Yeah, I guess I'll just mention like the cinematography. I thought it was pretty good for the most part. Like there's a lot of interesting shots from Beau's point of view where you don't usually see these point of view shots shot kind of in the way it is. It does kind of take into account like his age at different points throughout life, the height at which he'd be standing. There's a lot more of it than I thought like from a movie. It's not traditional to see so many shots from the point of view of a character. And I really did like a lot of kind of the more locked down, traditionally framed cinematography where it was, very much center framing people, which, is uncommon. Usually you're supposed to use the thirds, but there's a lot of center frame, then also framed by the sets themselves. And a lot of mirroring, like you show someone standing in a doorway and then you cut to the reverse and it's another person standing in a doorway, which is obviously, it's like, Colton, it's just people standing in doorways. But it was something when I was watching it, I was constantly noticing like the attention to detail on framing things in an untraditional way, which once again, with the way this movie is, that kind of makes sense.
Yeah.
It also reminded me of some of his short films. There's one called Basically and another one called C'est la vie, which is essentially just people sitting in their houses, but they're framed in such interesting ways that it kind of transcends just people sitting in their houses talking. And it's pretty well done, and I kind of got that vibe from this as well. And also, there's numerous profile shots in this movie, you know, BEAU running from left to right or right to left, kind of passing through sets and, you know, transitions that I thought were very impressive. And if you pay attention to them, it kind of almost works like dream logic, where it's like, oh, a wall just disappeared in order for this camera to pass through, but then when you kind of creep backwards and you see it, it's like the wall has reappeared again. It just very much feels like a dream, where it's kind of like sometimes it's progressing alongside BEAU's motion, where it feels very much connected to like the world itself, that it feels like a dream or a nightmare or something, right? It was just, there was a lot of it that I thought was really well done in terms of the cinematography, that it kept it interesting enough for 3 hours without even spoiling some of the weirder aspects of the movie as well.
Yeah, no, I agree. Like, it definitely, I thought definitely cinematography and it looked good. I don't know if I liked it as much as I liked his other outings, like Midsommar and stuff like that. But like you said, he kind of, you know, kept it interesting and fresh throughout it. That, you know, I was interested in it. Yeah, and, you know, I always like, I think the one thing I really like in any of these kind of films is, you know, I love myself an unreliable narrator. So, you know, I think half the fun of the movie is me trying to, you know, dig through, okay, what do I think's going on in his head? What do I think's not actually going on?
Yeah.
And all this kind of thing, because, I mean, we'll get into it more in the spoilers, but, you know, there's lots of, our beginning really sets up stuff about drugs and you know, what people are taking to help anxieties and things like that. So I thought that was just all just really interesting aspects of it.
Yeah, that kind of bleeds well into one of my other kind of maybe issues or, you know, things I just kind of want to mention in the movie. And this is this aspect of surrealism, which for me in this movie, like obviously a lot of the movie is very surreal. It's very weird. It's heightened. It's, you know, as we said, anything can happen. And for me, I think outside of one specific sequence in kind of Act 2 that goes on for a very long time, about 20 minutes, I don't know if a lot of the surrealism in this movie really works for me. Don't get me wrong, like I think some of it's pretty fun and you kind of can go along and have a good time, but when it's kind of extended to a 3-hour length, it gets a little exhausting or a little bit samey, even in the aspect like, it's constantly doing new things, but it's always still in very much in like, this is surreal, this is a dream, anything can happen sort of territory, where there's other movies, like you mentioned Mother, for example. I think BEAU Is Afraid is probably more competent than Mother, or like better in my mind. And then there's also like Gaspar Noé's Climax, right? Which is also similar. It's like a nightmare, weird, surrealist, you know, movie that's kind of all done in one take. I think both of those movies are kind of clever to stay like a little bit shorter, where BEAU Is Afraid is 3 hours long. So it's double the length of some of these movies, where it just, you feel the length no matter what you do. Because when you're leaning into a world of surrealism, and as I said, anything could happen, it just makes me kind of shrug sometimes, because you're not really into the world or the characters or whatnot, because it's truly like just so weird, right? It's like there's not really too many stakes to me, which is why when I was watching this, I was like, I feel like surrealism to a certain extent works better for me when it is like a short, you know, something that's 10 to 15 minutes where you can really put your stamp on something, kind of stand apart, or maybe in like, you know, like the TV realm, you know, like I think like I haven't seen a lot of, God, I'm forgetting the name of it now. Atlanta. I haven't seen a lot of Atlanta, but from what I understand, there's episodes of that are very surreal, and then people like enjoy them, and that's in a more, you know, digestible length, right? Like a runtime. So it was something to me that in this movie, I enjoyed parts of this surreal, weird vibe, but once again, it was almost like too much at a certain extent. Like it was a lot.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely not everyone's bag. I'm probably more of a surrealist fan. I mean, like, especially, you know, I'm like a huge David Lynch guy, And this was also, I think, kind of my issue with that. And, you know, I think of like Lars von Trier, stuff like that. And to me, you know, it's just surrealism is really hard when David Lynch is still making stuff, because to me, surrealism's really hard to make it work when you're not fully willing to just jump in the deep end and go full surrealist, where I just kept feeling like Ari Aster was almost scared to do that because he still kind of wanted, you know, as like abrasive as I think this movie's gonna be to a general audience, like I think he still wanted to have some sort of more connection or
a connective tissue. Like we said before recording this, that this movie isn't quite as inscrutable as some people make it out to be. There is very much a through line that you can connect from Act 1 to Act 3.
Yeah.
I would probably argue that I don't know if Act 2 does a lot to kind of connect that. It's kind of like 90 minutes that's a little bit meandering and almost like a series of vignettes. But when you've finished the movie, there is something you can take away from it, for sure. Like, or at least you can understand what it's trying to say.
Yeah, exactly. Where, you know, I think of like something like, I don't know, like David Lynch's Rabbits or something like that, where it's just like, you know, you're totally, I mean, it's David Lynch, so you're just totally in surrealist land where it's just, you know, wild and like nothing is familiar, but it is familiar, and it's just totally out there. And it's like I said, I think it's really hard to brush surrealism and not jump in to make it work, which is kind of the part that didn't work for me, you know, like you on this. I just thought it probably, I don't know what he would do to fix that. I guess maybe, you know, make it a little more realistic. I don't really know, because I mean, you couldn't tell this story in any realistic way. I guess maybe go more into a fantasy kind of aspect to it, but I would think that's the only way you could really make it work.
For you, do you think this is a stronger movie if it's not 3 hours long? Because you're always the guy it's like, let's cut it down to, you know, 90 minutes, 2 hours tops. Like, do you think this is better if it's 2 hours?
Maybe. I mean, probably. I probably could have used a little thing. I think what's really hard for me, because, you know, we talked about the 3 acts, where I personally separated it into 4 acts. And to me, you know, I'll get more into it in the spoiler section of what the acts are. But to me, I felt like the second act, I don't think it accomplished what it wanted to accomplish. I think you could have hung around there a little longer. Where the third act, to me, I thought was too long, and it just didn't really do anything either. So I felt like there needed to be some sort of balance, and I think you're probably on a right track of like maybe tightening this up a little bit so everything's kind of shortened down and just more impactful in a shorter time.
Yeah, we're gonna have to break down your act structure in the spoiler section so we can kind of discuss and very much kind of go back and forth on what aspects of this movie we liked and what worked, because I'm very much similar, that there's certain acts and certain moments in the movie that I was like, okay, that was fun, or, you know, oh, that was an interesting, you know, idea, or a vignette or a short film, let's say. But then it kind of goes, what does this comment and what does this say, like, on the greater stage of the movie? And lots of times I felt like it was kind of saying something that's basically the same as like the vignette that preceded it or came after it. So it's like, okay, if we're going to say the same thing for essentially 90 minutes here in the middle, it's kind of like, you're kind of wondering, like, why do we need this, right? You could have got away with doing it once or twice, you know? But yeah, Rowan, we're kind of talking a lot here, tiptoeing around things. What would you recommend this? How do you feel about it? Just, you know, for people that are listening to our spoiler-free thoughts.
I'll recommend it to a certain segment of people. Hey, you got to be willing to watch a 3-hour-long movie. And this has got to be something that you're into. You got to be willing to dip your toes into that surrealism and just kind of, you know, just a wild ride of just, you know, oddness. Like, this isn't going to be, you know, I can't recommend this to a fan of Hereditary or Midsommar because you're not going to like it if you like those strictly on their horror movies.
Yeah, if you go in expecting those movies, certainly not. You know, you can be a fan of both those movies
of course.
And be a fan of this, but like, yeah, if you're expecting it to be similar to Midsommar or Hereditary, you're going to be very disappointed.
Yeah, so I mean, I guess it would be a light recommend. I think it's definitely interesting to watch. And even from this, like, I'm interested in kind of revisiting it already, just because I think that it's one of those movies, the more you watch, maybe the more you'll be able to pull from it. But yeah, I'll give it like a light recommend. I don't think this is going to knock with a general audience, kind of like I said, like, I'm thinking about when Hereditary came out, and like there was just the buzz grew and grew. Like, I don't think that's happening with this one. What about you?
Yeah, I'm in a similar vein where it's a hard one to just say I recommend this movie to anybody. For me, like, basically what we said, if you're going into this because you're a fan of Hereditary and a fan of Midsommar and a fan of like this elevated horror, or, that dirty word, you're probably not going to like this based on the same merits you like those movies. But I think if you're just a fan of film and you want to see like weird things on screen, or you just kind of go see everything anyways, you kind of have to go see this movie because it's probably going to be one of the weirder movies released this year. And as we said, regardless of if you like it or hate it, it's going to elicit a strong emotion, like either way. So I would recommend it as like an experiment. And mostly because I think if you watched it at home, I don't know if you'd kind of give it its attention that you need to like fully be immersed in this world. You'd probably be on your phone and whatnot, because it's not action packed. It is surreal and it is weird, but there is loads of kind of slower moments or lulls in it for sure. So yeah, I don't know if I'd say it's a good movie fully, but I think there are good ideas in the movie. I think there's good scenes and extended sequences, and there's lots of good aspects. It's just, it's not Hereditary and it's not Midsommar even, which it's its own thing. It's very different. It's, like I said, more similar to Mother or Climax or something like that. Yeah, I don't know. It's a weird recommendation for me. It's, if you're a very certain type of person, So yeah, that's a light recommendation from probably both of us, I guess. It's just a weird movie. Hard to just say I fully recommend it. So yeah, I'm looking forward to discussing this, so I think it's time to cut to the spoiler discussion for BEAU is Afraid. We are now in our spoiler discussion for BEAU is Afraid, so if you have not seen BEAU is Afraid, it's time to tune out and come back once you've seen the movie, or keep listening if you simply don't care. Rowan, I want to hear your breakdown of the 4-act structure, just so we can kind of talk about the movie on, an even playing field. I'll retire the 3 acts so we can get into the 4 if you'd like.
I mean, yeah, I'm interested to see how your 3 split up. So my 4 was basically kind of our city landscape at the beginning of the movie. BEAU's apartment, BEAU's neighborhood, which is utter chaos. Just a pure shit show.
It's absolutely like unhinged. Like the fact of like the birthday boy stabber or whatever it's called, this naked lunatic running around, which one of his defining features is a circumcised penis, which then eventually comes back to BEAU as he's naked and locked out of his apartment and happens to be Jewish. Yeah, what an unhinged, weird beginning to this movie. I think the first time I like genuinely like laughed / enjoyed the movie was when BEAU got hit by a car, which is basically the ending of Act 1. But up until that moment, I was like kind of unnerved / kind of like confused, like what the fuck am I watching? Similar to that like moment in Babylon, which once again, it's not a horror movie, but like where the movie kind of begins with like an elephant shitting on the lead of the movie, where I was just like, what am I watching? This movie was very much elicited like a reaction from me of like, what is going on? It's just madness.
Yeah, I mean, I really did enjoy the first act, even from the beginning where we're in the therapist's office. It's kind of, I think, because you're going in with all those expectations of Ari Aster, I'm like, is this movie gonna have like some depressing, weird beginning like all the rest of its stuff, or and then it's not depressing, it's just crazy. And we get introduced to this drug that they give him a drug because his other one isn't working, which to me, they didn't even, they give you that little hint at the beginning, and it's never talked about again after the water incident of taking it and needing water, but his water shut off. Because my whole thing is like, is a lot of this caused by the drug? Is a lot of this, there's all these side effects we see. I did laugh really hard when, he's on the computer and he's looking
Yeah,
up
he
the side
Googles.
effects, and it
Yeah,
just
what
goes to a
happens-
funeral home. Like,
Yeah, a bunch of obituaries talking about how they died because they drank the drug without water. And like that's what I was saying in the spoiler-free section. This movie does a really good job of kind of, putting in you in the head of like when you Google like a medical abnormality, oh, I got a pain in my neck, and you Google it, it's like, oh, it's probably bone cancer, it's terminal, like you're toast.
you got 48 hours to live, but
Exactly, yeah. For me, I didn't take it that way though, in terms of that it was the drug
No.
causing it. Yeah, I didn't think that it was induced by the drug at all. For me, I was just basically like, I think he was just anxious about a flight the next day, couldn't sleep well, and I think literally it's just like from that night, I think it's just literally an anxiety-induced nightmare. I think that's literally the whole movie. I think it is a dream sequence movie. I don't even know if the drug stuff factors into it.
yeah, well, I mean, and that's the thing. Like, there's so many like threads to pull, and so yeah. So that was kind of my first act. My second act was after he gets hit by the car, and we have like Nathan Lane's character, the surgeon, take him into the house. So which I thought was it is an interesting contrast, because we're going from like this crowded, hectic city, then we're going into the suburbs, and it's kind of this like middle higher class suburb. And this was also the section that I was commenting before that I felt we could have lived in a little bit longer, just because I really enjoyed it. It was like everything was just a little off-putting, and we were having like the wife like try to like whisper stuff to him, and hand him notes, like a note that like says stop incriminating yourself, even though we have no idea what that means, and the stuff with the daughter, and like I said, I really enjoyed the daughter's performance,
blackmailing him into doing drugs and whatnot.
and all this stuff, but it just it felt to me that part was almost, for me, it was too rushed. That it was just like, okay, like we're not tying any of this stuff up at all, and we're just not really. Like I said, I think it's just because I enjoyed it so much, I wanted to live in it.
Yeah, that's interesting, because I think that's probably dominated like a good portion of the movie. Like, I bet if I went and looked at the runtime, I bet that's probably 40 minutes of the movie. It feels like that sequence to me. Now, maybe it's because there is like a flashback sequence couched in there as well.
Yes, yeah.
So maybe it isn't purely like in the present, with Nathan Lane and those characters, but it felt very kind of lengthy to me, because I was just waiting for him to finally embark from the house to go towards his mother, which obviously just keeps getting kicked down the road. That's going to take longer and longer, and it's because they're just trying to keep him essentially captive in this house, right? Yeah, for me, I thought that sequence was kind of long, honestly, so I'm surprised that you wanted even more.
Big Misery vibes. I mean, I was really enjoying what was going on, and we have like their son's like army vet friend that's just constantly in the background of shots, lingering and watching him. Yeah, which that was like some of my favorite camera work in it, was just like you said, kind of these, like, they had the center shot of him like trying to get a hold of someone on the phone, and in the background you just have him like freaking out, and I really enjoyed that. And then, like I said, then the third to me was the woods, going into the woods, and coming across this play that goes on in the woods.
Yeah.
Where to me, this is like probably the most surreal the film gets.
I would probably hasten a guess, and I haven't listened to too many people discuss this movie, but I would probably say it features a sequence that most people will probably say it's their favorite sequence in the movie. Probably. It's a very surreal sequence where essentially BEAU becomes involved in the play, breaks the shackles that are like keeping him in the play, so then he can kind of change his life and go forward and basically live the life he'd want to live, where, he cuts off his family, his mom, and, the kind of his father, who's kind of being a constant anxiety over his whole life, and goes on to like live a happy life and have kids and all this stuff. Eventually keep wandering looking for them, because even in this, this idealized version of his life, it's still like he loses his kids. So it was kind of interesting. I liked it, but I think it's legitimately about 20 minutes long, this weird animated, like, stop motion sequence of the movie.
And I'll be honest, this was probably my least favorite part of it.
Wow,
so maybe,
wow.
maybe that's a hot opinion there or something. I mean, I did enjoy like the animation and stuff. Like I thought it looked beautiful, but I just thought like for plot wise, I was like, we're getting a little muddled here. Then of course when he comes out of the play, we have the thing about the guy that's been following him, that's basically like trying to say, you know, like at first he's like, I knew your father. And then kind of, you know, Beau believes it is his father, who's then like exploded because this army vet has been following him. And it was just like a lot of things going on at once, which, like I said, I feel is why this movie, you know, wants you to watch it many times to kind of say, okay, am I missing something here?
Yeah, there's a scene or a shot in Act 1 where I think it shows Jesus on a billboard behind when Beau's kind of locked outside of his apartment. And it looks like that actor's face on Jesus, which I'm not 100% sure on that, but in my head when I saw that billboard, I was like, wow, Jesus looks weird here. And then when we got to that act that you're talking about, the traveling troupe act, I was like, oh, I think that guy is the same actor as the guy who's on the billboard playing Jesus. But once again, I don't know. I can't confirm that. I'd have to rewatch. But it was a weird thing that he had a striking resemblance to it, at least.
And then obviously for me, the fourth act was
the funeral.
You know, what do we call that act? Just the monster penis act, or what?
Yeah, I mean, you can call it that. It's the act that features a monstrous penis that just gets the shit stabbed out of it. So yeah, a lot of people, from what I heard, hate this act, but weirdly enough, I think it may have been my favorite, which is a hot take.
I liked it. I really liked it.
Okay, so maybe it's not too much of a hot take on this podcast, but I actually really enjoyed it as well, just because a lot of things we set up in Act 1 kind of finally come to fruition, where, you know, it winds up essentially being that it's this grand conspiracy that his mother faked her death and, you know, did it just to kind of showcase how terrible of a son he is and how he doesn't like reciprocate any of her love, this toxic love that has kind of lingered over him his entire life. I just thought it fit like the type of movie it was going for, and just, you know, once again, what are the anxieties that he's having when stretched to like the nth degree, like when they just go. Probably one of the worst things most people could imagine is the first time you're having sex, the person that you're having sex with, that you're happy, you know, you had a great experience, you know, you're so overjoyed.
You're listening to Mariah Carey.
Yeah, you're listening to Mariah Carey, and then they just literally die on you. Already that's horrific enough. But then what if your mother was also watching?
And a bunch of other people too.
Yeah, it's so messed up
Yeah.
that I was just like, yeah, this kind of fits like the vibe of this movie. And it also felt just like thematically consistent with like from Act 1 to Act 3. Because in Act 1, like there's all this like MW, you know, his microwave, what he's eating is MW. The pill bottle, I think, is MW Pharmaceuticals, which is literally it's his mom's company, right? Like Mona Wasserman or whatever. And it's just like a really good metaphor, I think, that basically his mom provided for him his entire life. He doesn't have a job. He doesn't have like a girlfriend. He doesn't have really anything living for him. He's just completely a mother's, you know, mommy's boy. And basically the way she perceives it is like, I've literally given you everything, but you're not reciprocating it or not giving me enough. You know, he says no, or, you know, can't make it to come visit her, and it's just literally like, okay, I'm dead to you, essentially, right? It's I don't know, it coalesced into like a theme that made sense to me by the end of it, I guess.
Yeah, no, well, and even, you know, you're talking about, you know, MW on everything. We even see when he arrives at her home and he's missed the funeral, so he's going over the timeline, which was interesting because the timeline was backwards. But we see like she even owns the apartment building. That
yes.
They've got the poster of the brand new building, which in the first act is like a giant piece of shit, and which is where I thought that was also funny, because I was like, oh, well, maybe that is all in his head, and it's actually this really nice place, but with his anxieties and the issues with his mother, he's envisioning like, oh, she's got me living in this like shithole, and you know, all this crime, all that kind of stuff.
And then there's the picture of his mother that kind of puts the bow on everything, you know, pun not intended, but like it's literally a picture of her made up of basically all of the actors you've seen throughout the movie, that it all makes it seem like they were all paid off by her and part of like this grand conspiracy, which once again, if you were treating this movie literally, makes absolutely no sense and is super stupid and a dumb twist. But in the head of someone who's incredibly anxious, they're looking at like, my mom is so rich, they have so much kind of, power in my life. They've provided for me my entire life. What if all these people are sleeper agents? What if they all are just paid for by my mother, right? It's an anxiety that even has with Elaine at the end of the movie when she shows up, and it's kind of like, oh, but you're an employee of my mom, so how could you actually like me or have any feelings for me, right? It's I don't know. Once again, a lot of the things in the third act worked for me.
Just like you, that was my favorite act, and we did talk about it, but I'll say it again. I loved everything that had to do with Parker Posey in this. I was like, man, like, because it's not a huge role, but I mean,
No.
Parker Posey is a fairly large actress of the time, when she was big in the 90s and stuff, and what a great like little role for her to take. And that was, when that happened, like even I was like, oh, okay, hold on a second. Cause I was like, now we're going to get into some like Ari Aster shit. Because like this is before the mother rolls out and then I'm laughing again. But like, I thought just that moment, like what a great little Ari, like she looked horrific. And it, she's kind of like almost like all twisted up and just like.
Yeah, you're talking about where she's like rigor mortis, like completely like on top of him, right? Just stuck, and it's a very interesting thing for the character because they kind of hammer home how I think it's his father and his grandfather, maybe
and his great grandfather. Yeah,
they all died as soon as they conceived their son. Essentially, they died like basically right after ejaculation, right after they climax, which is then put this weird kind of sexually repressed idea in Beau's head his entire life, where essentially it's just like, I can't ever climax, essentially, right? So like when you're watching this sex scene that's incredibly awkward and features Mariah Carey and the song is restarted because it's not the vibe and all this shit, it's so awkward, but in our heads we're like, oh, is Beau gonna die in this moment? And weirdly enough, I didn't think, what if the opposite happens and the woman dies on top of him and then he's stranded with a corpse on top of him, and it's so crazy. It's such like a horrific moment, and then just how like his mother's henchmen come in and just like carry her off as well, and her body's still completely like rigor mortis, like in the pose that she was like riding him. It's so like gnarly. It's such a like graphic scene. But yeah, it was very like Ari Aster when I was watching. I was like, oh my god, it's horrific.
So I feel like we gotta talk about Dick Monsters a little more thoroughly. So so obviously we get the scene in this kind of final act where throughout the film we've kind of been taunted with that flashback of Beau has a nightmare, and his nightmare is that he's got a twin brother, and the twin brother gets locked in an attic and all this kind of stuff. And I did giggle a little bit. I laughed when he's explaining to his mother, and then she's just like, you idiot, that was a memory, not a nightmare. And then, so she leads him up to the attic, and we get revealed Beau's twin brother, I guess. I
have a theory on what that is, but yeah, you can keep going.
Yeah, I was gonna say this is probably also similar to my theory too. So and then we get a giant dick. It's just a giant dick with a face on it, and it's the size of the attic. And then we get this. I thought it was so absurd. It was funny. I was laughing. Where we then get the army vet that we thought was dead
because he blew up.
He just runs back in, and he starts stabbing the ball sack of this monster.
Yep.
And
it's oh man, it's something. I think this was the moment in the movie that 100% lost about 99% of my audience. I don't think very many people were thinking about this very critically. I think they were very much like, all right, I've wasted 2.5 hours of my life. It was the vibe I got from so many people. But when I was just like even thinking on it just for like a moment, like once again, she's saying like, oh, you idiot, that's a memory. It's like, it very much can't be a memory, right? The guy who blew up is showing up, obviously his father can't be literally an absolutely massive monstrous penis. So in my head, I think this is kind of just this brother, this identical version of himself is not actually his brother, but it's probably a piece of Beau that would act up from time to time, or a stronger version of himself like that he would want to be to kind of stand up to his mother.
Yeah.
That his mother, through, raising him, basically hammered out that version of him. It locked it away that he can never really have that version of himself. Similar to how he knows nothing about his father, other than that he died in the act of creating him, literally in the sex act. So he doesn't really think of his father at all, other than probably like this monstrous male genitalia, or like quite literally his father was a dick,
Yeah,
left
exactly.
him, type of
exactly.
thing, right?
Because the mother throughout the entire thing, we're told that his mother thinks very poorly of Beau's
100%.
father. So
Yeah.
that's what I thought. I was like, oh yeah, this is pretty much, just tongue in cheek that the father is a dickhead, that he's just a giant dick. And yeah, if it doesn't work for you, you have no soul, because it was hilarious. Like, I thought the monster design was great, and it was just, and it wasn't like a ridiculously big part of the film. And
No, it's, I don't know, it's probably a minute,
Yeah.
that sequence. And once again, I understand if you're like kind of off this ride at any point in this movie, and there was numerous times where I was kind of off the ride, but not enough to like check my phone or check my watch or anything. It was just very much like, once again, that surrealist aspect where I'm like, yeah, anything could happen, nothing really surprises me. I will admit that the giant penis did surprise me. I didn't expect that. At that point in the movie, I thought we were really going to be revealing some like dark trauma up there. So, and once again, obviously that is traumatic, what happened, but it was just funny to see it like embodied in like a 15-foot tall penis that's kind of like dwarfed in this attic. It just takes up so much of the space. It was just, it was wild.
So I am curious what you thought about the ending, or big like ending set of him on the boat. He's escaping his mother's place after murdering her, and then we kind of get like Beau on trial, essentially. And I was just curious what you thought.
Yeah, I mean, like, I don't think it's the most satisfying ending. So like, I understand how people kind of had this reaction of like, that's it. Like, the movie says written and directed by Ari Aster, I think probably about 5 minutes before it actually goes to a black screen and shows the long credits. And I think even when it says written and directed by Ari Aster, I think Beau is still kind of struggling for his life, in terms of like he's still drowning underneath the boat and it's kind of like jostling and whatnot. But I think it was just like, once again, I think it was just his mom putting him on trial, highlighting all this aspects in his life of where she believed that he wasn't a good son, or at least he was ungrateful, right? Like, didn't show her the love that she believed she deserved, or showed him. And it was just kind of showing like, hey, look at all these like traumatic and terrible moments in Beau's life. And obviously the audience in the stadium or whatever that was gathering, it's literally supposed to be us, right? Like, what have we just done by sitting here and watching this movie? We literally watched Beau be tortured essentially for 3 hours, enjoyed it or hated it, whatever way you go, you still sat there and watched it if you made it to this point. And what are we going to do? We're going to watch this man drown, and then we're all going to filter out of the theater slowly, one by one. And the funny thing is like literally how the movie portrayed it, like kind of groups getting up and almost like talking amongst themselves and like walking out, was very much the way it worked.
How it went. Yeah.
Yeah. So for me, it's kind of like not a surprise that he dies at the end of the movie. I think there is probably a little bit of interpretation left to be that it seems like he kind of gives up or doesn't care about his mom's opinion within the last probably 5 seconds of the movie. So maybe it is a more optimistic ending, like when he snaps out of his dream and maybe he can have a real life or live closer to that life that he imagined in that play sequence. But it just very much felt to me like that old adage that mothers will say to you from time to time, like, I brought you into this world, I can take you out, was like very much like what it felt like. It's like once she decides that she's done with him, it's very much like the motor in his boat explodes and he's capsized and drowns. And I thought just like the audio work in the scene and the way it was kind of composed, it reminded me very much of the beginning of the movie, where he's being literally delivered, and you kind of hear him in utero in the amniotic fluid, kind of struggling to take his first breaths. I think even like the nurses and whatnot in the room say like he's not breathing, or it's very much like he's brought into this world struggling to breathe, like basically already like having probably a pretty anxious existence. And the movie kind of ends the same way, where he's struggling to breathe and can't catch his breath, and that's kind of it. right? So I don't know. It like worked for me. I don't think it's like the most satisfying ending. It's not even like very shocking or surprising. It's kind of like, yeah, okay. I mean, I get what it's going for, essentially.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I mean, I can't complain about it too much because, we actually, instead of just hearing him, got to see Richard Kind, who I love, as a big Curb Your Enthusiasm guy.
Was that the mother's like defense lawyer? Or?
Yeah.
Yeah, he was great. Yeah.
Yeah,
I
he was
recognized his
fantastic.
voice or his face or something, but I was like, yeah, this guy's great. Yeah.
He does tons of voice acting and cartoons, and I mean, he was a bigger kind of sitcom movie actor in the 90s.
Gotcha. Let's talk about the flashback sequence just a little bit before we get out of it, because we never really talked about, the young kid playing Beau, who his name is Armin Nahapetian? I don't know, something like that. Anyways, a lot of people thought he was a CGI creation when this movie was being marketed, which was quite funny because he's actually a real kid. I kind of like that sequence a little bit. Like, it was in the sequence that you kind of said that was, too short. But I did like that flashback sequence. It was like a morbid kind of romantic comedy in this movie, I thought.
I thought it really worked. It gave you some background, a little more like grounded understanding where like the anxieties of Beau and his mom come from. I thought like the younger actress that played the girl was fantastic. Like
I thought she was really good as well.
Awesome.
Even like maintaining that like anxiety of like the anxiety of a first kiss is already anxious enough because you don't know like when to lean in. But then the fact that she was like, we only have 10 seconds to do this and you have to make up your mind right now. And she starts like counting backwards was like very good. The fact that there was like literally a corpse in the pool like nearby, like all these like weird little details, like it definitely did elevate it a little bit for me. And it's like such a weird thing. Like, obviously, so many people when you're kids, you make like all these promises of like, oh, if I don't have a girlfriend by the time I'm this age, we'll date and we'll be married, or like, oh, there's all these ideas of saving yourself for marriage or whatever. That I thought it was funny that this movie took a very literal approach of like a girl saying like, wait for me, and Beau literally sits around his whole life just waiting for this one girl. Yeah, it's just, I don't know. It was a weird idea that, once again, I did like.
Yeah, and I gotta admit, I was one of those people, I'm watching it, and I was like, man, the CGI on this kid is flawless.
Why did I not, I'm not surprised at all. That's great. Yeah, I feel like I never talked about like much that I didn't like about this movie, but honestly, it's just like the length, it's too long. A lot of the scenes kind of go on a little bit too long. It's almost like my issue with the Midsummer director's cut, where I feel like the theatrical cut of the movie is just better because it just kind of extends everything a little bit too long, where you kind of lose the pacing. And that's kind of like with this. I feel like it's a little bit too long. It's a little bit too rambly. It's a little bit too self-indulgent at times. And I feel like there's just a better cut, like maybe with a little bit more studio interference that actually makes the movie stronger. I know that's like might be, I don't know, sacrilegious to say. But it's just, I don't know. There's no way this movie recoups its budget of $35 million. Like at 3 hours long, what sort of movie this is, there's no way. I don't think it's an Ari Aster career killer, but I think if his next movie's with A24, I think it's not going to be a $35 million movie is pretty much how I feel about it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see, especially, I mean, someone like Ari Aster who's like, got a claim from like Scorsese and stuff. Like it'll be super interesting to see what this does and who wants to take a chance on them. Because like you said, I don't think this is going to, I don't think this is surpassing Super Mario Brothers in the box office.
No, I don't think so, but he probably does have a cult classic on his hands, is what I'll say. This very much feels like it'll have an audience that will thoroughly enjoy it years from now, for sure. Yeah, and I think with that, I think we should probably get into reviewing this thing. So if you're new to the podcast, our review rubric is nay, okay, yay, or slay. So Rowan, what would you give Beau Is Afraid?
Yeah, so, as weird as I said it was, I did enjoy it. I did enjoy my viewing time with it. I'm going to give it a yay. So this will actually be the weakest one I've reviewed. I gave Hereditary a slay, I think, and I definitely gave Midsummer a slay.
Wow.
So, I like those better? Obviously, I'm more of a horror guy. Those are more horror movies, but I thought what this did was super interesting. Do I think there might be some stuff lost in translation for me? Maybe. I know I've heard Ari Aster talk about that, that he felt the audience member that was going to get the most out of this was, he said that it was a very personal story about Jewish men and their relationships with their mothers, and I'm not Jewish, so, I have no idea about that. So maybe someone that is Jewish is going to watch this and it's going to blow their mind and they'll be able to relate to it way more than I will. But yeah. I think, everybody has anxieties about something, and this just cranks it to the 100th degree. And, I think even the story, even if the story's a little, convoluted or not as well as you want it to be, it looks good. It, like, just looking at it, it gives you something to like about it. What about you, Colton? What would you rate it?
This is a weird one for me because it's been growing on me since I've watched it. In my original notes, I think I said something along the lines of, like, it's not something I'll think about very much, like, after I've seen it, like, because it's just so surrealistic, and it's just, like, I don't know if there's anything I could take away from it. But as I've kind of discussed it with you, as I've kind of explained it to a couple of friends, I think it has gotten out of the nay territory for me, because originally I was like, this was pretty bad. So I think I'm going to give it an okay. I think it's one of those, the more I talk about it, the more I watch it, there is a possibility it increases in my mind of, like, what I enjoyed about it. It's just kind of like, it's a little bit too meandering, a little bit too long, and not everything kind of works for me. Once again, like I said, like, the acting is kind of weird. A lot of the dialogue is weird. The surreal nature of, like, things constantly happening every 3 or 4 minutes, like, changing these weird anxiety-ridden scenarios. Like, a lot of them work for me, but it winds up just almost feeling a little bit exhausting by the end of it. What I will still maintain is that I'm not someone who has, like, generalized anxiety disorder. I get anxious over things like I got a job interview, or maybe public speaking in my personal life, not on a podcast or as part of a job. But it kind of got me into the headspace where I feel like I can understand if someone has, like, generalized anxiety disorder, because this movie very much plays on all the anxieties that personally kind of pass through my head and I kind of let go. But I can kind of understand now conceptually how, like, someone can grab onto that and can kind of completely consume them, which is very much that vibe that the movie's going for. So, I mean, I don't know if very many movies kind of accomplish that. Like, it's quite a feat, to put me in the headspace of a completely different character, or someone I don't fully understand because I haven't been there myself. So, I mean, I got to give it credit for that. Once again, cinematography is really good. I'm going to give it an okay. It's definitely increasing in my mind about what I think about it the more I think about it. And like I said, on a rewatch, who knows? It might be a yay. So, a yay from you, an okay from me, and I will agree that, in my opinion, it's the weakest Ari Aster movie. Yeah. Just for my own sensibilities. And if you made it this far in the podcast and you're not following us on our social medias already, you can do so at It Slays Podcast. We're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, Slasher, Letterboxd. If there's a social media, we're probably there at It Slays Podcast. And if you want to help support the show financially, like our horror hounds Holly, Nicholas, Patrick, Mark, Stephen, Joy, and Carvey, gain access to the Patreon exclusive show Stream Screams and get episodes of the main show 48 hours early, be sure to head on over to patreon.com/itslayspodcast and choose whatever tier works best for you. Now, Rowan, go ahead and plug the playlist. There's some weird needle drops in this movie that we alluded to with the Mariah Carey, but there's also a couple other ones.
I don't know how sacrilegious it would be for me to put a Mariah Carey song on our horror playlist, but I mean, you never know. But yeah, go to Spotify, go to the It Slays Podcast Horrific playlist. If you have any problems finding it, all those social media Colton told you about, you can go there, you can click on the link tree, and there's a link directly to it. We upload music from horror movies we review, or iconic horror movies, or just horror movies we love in general. And yeah, go take a listen, and, add it to your list of playlists, and get your spooky music on whenever you want.
And with that, I think all that we have left really is kind of to say what we're doing next time on the show. And as I look at my notes, I don't know, there's not really anything planned. I think there's the Boogeyman sometime early June. I think for the month of May, there's not much coming out. So we have no idea currently what we're doing next. But obviously, if there's something interesting that crops up in the world of horror, we'll be back with another new episode. And with that, I think that about wraps things up for this episode. So until next time, I'm Colton.
I'm Rowan.
And as long as you keep listening, we'll keep slaying.